Greetings, lore of Warcraft viewers, World of Warcraft players most likely. Welcome to another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we read Chapter 12 of Arthas, the Rise of the Lich King. We basically saw a first-hand view culling of Stratholme. Arthas and his boys went up in there. Most of them actually did not. They dipped. They left with Uther, who was accused of treason because of it, and said they weren't going to do it. And so did Jaina. She left too, and that was the final real rift between her and Arthas. That's it. Game over for their relationship. Then he went in there, and his loyalists, the men that agreed they would rather die than become a zombie. And so in this twisted way, they really think that they're doing what's right. But if you just take your time and think, there are so many better options. And that should be an individual decision everyone gets to make. So yes, Arthas was fatally flawed, and he made a atrocious decision. So stay a while and listen to this one. It's chapter 13 of what comes next. Notice that we're not reading in Chronicles, because I think this is something that's kind of more not Chronicles territory. It maybe happens, but it's not super important. I think that tends to be how that goes. All right. 3 days later, Lady Jaina Proudmoore walked the streets of what had once been a proud city, the glory of northern Lordaeron. Now it was the stuff of nightmares. The stench was almost unbearable. She lifted a handkerchief liberally scented with peace bloom essence to her face in a partially successful attempt to filter out the worst of it. And there's another one of those nods to the WoW game, the peace bloom main level, early level herbalism thing. Christy Golden's a fan. Fires that ought to have consumed themselves or have abated at least slightly from lack of fuel continued to rage at their full height, telling Jaina that some dark magic was afoot. Combined with the acrid smell of smoke that stung her eyes and throat was the reek of putrefaction. That also goes to explain why Stratholme is perpetually kind of burning. They lay as they had fallen, most of them unarmed. Tears welled in Jaina's eyes and slipped down her cheeks as she moved as if in a trance, carefully stepping over the bloated bodies. A soft whimper of pain escaped as she saw that Arthas and his men in their misguided mercy had not even spared the children. Would these bodies lying still and stiff in death have risen to attack her if Arthas had not slain them? Perhaps. Many of them, certainly. The grain had indeed been distributed and consumed, but every single one? She would never know, nor would he. Jaina, I ask you again, come with me. His voice was intense, but it was clear his mind was 1,000 leagues away. He escaped me. I saved the city's inhabitants from becoming his slaves, but at the last minute he got away. He's in Northrend. Come with me. So he's beseeching her again. Jaina closed her eyes. She did not want to remember that conversation of a day and a half ago. She did not want to remember how he looked, cold and angry and distant, fixated on killing this dreadlord. Like a demon, at the expense of everything else. She stumbled across a body and her eyes snapped open again to the horror that the man she had loved still did love despite everything. How she could still love him after this she did not know, but lightsaber she did. It's a trap. He's a demon lord. If he was powerful enough to elude you in Stratholme, he will certainly defeat you in his own territory, where he is strongest. Don't go. Please. She had wanted to throw herself into his arms, physically keep him there beside her. He couldn't go to Northrend. He would be going to his death. And although he had dealt out so much to others, Jaina found she could not wish for his. So much death, she murmured. I can't believe Arthas could have done this. And yet she knew he had. A whole city. Jaina Proudmoore. Jaina started violently, snapped out of her sickened trance by the sound of the familiar voice. Uther. A strange feeling of relief swept over her as she turned in the direction of the hail. Uther had always intimidated her slightly. He was so large and powerful and, so deeply entrenched in the light. She recalled with an incongruously guilty flush how when she and Arthas were younger they used to make fun of Uther's piety, which to them verged on the pompous and sanctimonious, behind the knight's back. He was a fairly easy target, but 3 excruciating days ago she and Uther had both stood against Arthas. "You swore you would never deny me, Jaina," Arthas accused, his voice sharp as an icy knife blade. "But when I most needed your support, your understanding, you turned against me."
Arthas, we didn't know enough to...
"And now you refuse to aid me. I'm going to Northrend, Jaina. I would have you with me to help me stop this evil. Won't you come?" Jaina winced. Uther noticed but said nothing. Clad in full plate armor, despite the overwhelming heat of the unnaturally blazing fires, he strode swiftly toward her. His stature and presence was now a picture of strength and solidity rather than an intimidation to her. He did not embrace her, but did grasp her arms reassuringly. "I thought I might find you here. Where is he gone, girl? Where has Arthas taken the fleet?" Jaina's eyes widened. "The fleet?" Uther grunted in affirmation. "He's commandeered the entire Lordaeron fleet and taken off with them. Sent only the briefest message to his own father. We don't know why they obeyed without direct orders from their commanders." Jaina gave him a small, sad smile.
"Because he's their prince. He's Arthas. They love him. They didn't know about this."
A flicker of pain crossed Uther's rugged features, and he nodded. "Aye," he said softly. "He's always been good to the men who serve him. They can tell that he genuinely cares about them, and they'll serve him with their lives." Regret laced the words. They were true insofar as they went, and once Arthas had deserved such undying devotion. "Now you refuse to aid me." Uther shook her gently, bringing her back to the present. "Do you know where he might have taken them, child?" Jaina took a deep breath.
"He came to me before he left. I pleaded with him not to go. I told him it sounded like a trap."
"Where?" Uther was relentless.
"Northrend. He's gone to Northrend to hunt Mal'Ganis, the demon lord who is responsible for the plague. He couldn't defeat him here."
"A demon lord? Damn that boy!" The outburst startled Jaina. "I've got to inform Taranis."
"I tried to stop him," Jaina repeated. "Then, when he..."
She gestured helplessly at the almost inconceivable number of dead that kept them silent company. She wondered for the 1,000th time if she could have stopped it. If she had found the right words, touched Arthas the right way, if he would have been swayed.
"But I failed. I failed you, Arthas. I failed these people. I failed myself."
Uther's heavy, gauntleted hand dropped on her slim shoulder. "Don't be too hard on yourself, girl." She laughed humorlessly.
"Is it that obvious?"
"Anyone with a heart would wonder the same. I know I do." She glanced up at him, startled at the admission.
"You do?"
Jaina asked. He nodded. Excuse me. His eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, and there was a pain in those depths that struck her to the core. "I could not fight him. He is still my prince, but I wonder, could I have stood in his path, said something else, done something else?" Uther sighed and shook his head. Perhaps not. But that moment is in the past, and my choices cannot be undone. You and I must both look to the future now. Jaina Proudmoore, you had nothing to do with this slaughter. Thank you for telling me where he has gone." She lowered her head.
"I feel like I've betrayed him again."
"Jaina, you may have saved him, and all the men who are going with him in ignorance of what he has become." Startled at his choice of words, she looked up sharply.
"What he's become? He's still Arthas, Uther."
Uther's eyes looked haunted. He is, but he made a dreadful choice, and one with repercussions we've yet to see played out. I don't know that he can come back from this." Uther turned and eyed the dead. "We know the dead can be raised to life, that demons truly exist. Now I wonder if there are such things as ghosts too. If there are, a prince will be 10 thick in them." He bowed to her. "Come away from this place, lady." She shook her head.
"No, not yet. I'm not ready."
He searched her eyes, then nodded. "As you will. I'll be with you, Lady Jaina Proudmoore."
"And you, Uther the Lightbringer.
She gave him the best smile she could muster and watched as he strode off. Arthas would no doubt see this as yet another betrayal, but if it saved his life, then she could live with that. The smell was starting to become more than ever even her stubborn will would permit her to handle. She paused for a last look. Part of her wondered why she had come here. The other part knew. She had come to brand these images into her brain, to understand the depth of what had happened. She must never, ever forget. Whether or not Arthas was past reaching, she didn't know, but what happened here would need to never become a footnote in the history books. I wouldn't say it's a footnote. A raven wheeled down slowly. She wanted to rush forward and shoo it away to try to protect the poor battered corpses, but it was only doing what its nature told it to do. It did not have a conscience to tell it that what it was doing was offensive to human sensibilities. She looked at the raven for a moment, and then her eyes widened, began to shift, change, grow, and in an instant where a carrion bird had once perched stood a man. She gasped in recognition, the same prophet she had seen twice before. "You?" He inclined his head and gave her an odd smile that told her without words, "I recognize you too." This was the third time she had seen him, once when he was speaking with Antonidas, and once with Arthas. She had been invisible on both occasions, and clearly her invisibility spell had not fooled him for a moment either time. "The dead in this land might lie still for the time being, but don't be fooled. Your prince will find only death in the cold north." His blunt words made her flinch slightly. "Arthas is only doing what he believes is right." The words were true, and she knew it. Whatever his failings were, he had been utterly sincere in his belief that the purging of Stratholme was the only option. The prophet's gaze softened. "Commendable as that may be," he said, "his passions will be his undoing. It falls to you now, young sorceress." "What? Me?" "Antonidas has dismissed me. Taranis and Arthas as well. Both rulers of men and masters of magic have turned their faces from true understanding. But I think you may not." The aura of power around him was palpable. Jaina could almost see it swirling about him, heady and strong. He stepped closer to her and placed his hand on her shoulder. She gazed up into his eyes, confused. "You must lead your people west to the ancient lands of Kalimdor. Only there can you combat the shadow and save this world from the flame." Staring into those eyes, Jaina knew he was right. There was no control, no compelling, just a knowing deep and certain and down to her bones. Swallowing hard, she took one last look at the horrors wrought by the man she loved and still did love, and nodded. "I will do as you say, and leave my Arthas to the destiny he has chosen. There is no other way. It will take time to gather them all, to make them believe me." "I do not know that you have that much time left. So much of it has already been squandered." Jaina lifted her chin. "I cannot go without trying. If you know so much about me, then surely you must know that." The raven prophet seemed to relax marginally and smiled at her, squeezing her shoulder. "Do what you feel you must, but do not tarry over long. The hourglass empties swiftly, and delay could be deadly." She nodded, too overcome to speak. So many to talk to. Antonidas is chief among them. If he would listen to anyone, she thought it would be her. She would bear witness for these dead, for the folly of not retreating to Kalimdor while the living yet walked here. The prophet's form dwindled and shifted, becoming once again that of the large black bird, and he flew off with a rustle of wings. And somehow as it brushed her face, the wind from those black wings did not smell of carrion or smoke or death. It smelled clean and fresh. It smelled of hope. Oh, that's it. That was a little shorty. All right. Okay. So this is almost like an interlude. So the prophet's convinced Jaina. Arthas is gone, heading north, and I think we're going to get to that next in this book. But Jaina is convinced, and now she's going to start trying to convince them to the Alliance to go there too. Cool. All right, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. Hey, thanks everyone so much for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.